911 operator, what is a call that gave you the chills? Posted 1 day ago. Little after 2 a.m., I got a call of a car gone off a 100-foot embankment into the river. As officers arrive on scene and begin rescue and body search, I get relayed name of the deceased, who had been a friend of mine. I knew 5 out of 6 in the car, and as the search was wrapping up, I began to get calls from parents of the victims who knew me. Rough night in a rural area. Call came in around 6 a.m. in the morning. Teenage kids had gone downstairs to find their father collapsed on the kitchen floor. Per his son, he was unconscious but still breathing. Per protocol, I confirmed their address, sent the case to dispatch, and stayed on the line. I had the kids turn him onto his side into the recovery position. I reassured them. For a couple of teens, they really held it together. I told them to monitor his breathing. They said he was still breathing, kind of. And that's when I heard it on the other end of the line. That wasn't breathing. That was the death rattle. Agonal breathing. That was the first time as an EMD I'd heard that awful fucking rattling sound in a live environment. God help me, may it be my last. In an instant, I upgraded the case. This was no longer an unconscious patient, but somebody in cardiac arrest. Dispatch was notified. I saw additional resources being attached. I told the 2 teenagers in a voice that I hope had even a fraction of the composure they exhibited that we needed to roll their father onto his back, that we needed to commence CPR straight away. I work in a job where you have people in their 20s and 30s calling you up screaming, hysterical, and utterly inconsolable because of a fucking headache or a cut finger or a sore back. And yet these 2 kids, barely out of their teens, were pumping away at their dad's chest without hesitation, working in tandem to perform the best damn CPR I've ever heard over the phone in my 6 years as an EMD. All I could hear in the background as I helped them keep pace was their father's rattling breathing. I'm not religious, but you can bet I prayed to God Almighty to just let this one live. Please, for fuck's sake, just let these kids keep their father. Is that so much to ask? At least give the guy a chance to say his goodbyes properly. It was only when the sirens in the background drowned out all the other sounds and the crews confirmed they were at scene that I quickly told those kids how proud I was of them and disconnected. I made it a point of mine to never follow up jobs like this, but curiosity eventually got the best of me. I found out a few days later that the guy had passed away. I wish I'd never followed up. Not really the chills, but this stuck with me because it'd just be such a weird story this guy has for life. Guy called in the morning after going onto his balcony with his morning coffee, and he's greeted by a severed arm. Just the arm, nothing else. Turns out, someone had jumped from a much higher floor than his, smacked his arm on the railing on the way down, and the impact took it clean off. The remains of the body had already been cleaned up on the ground by the time the guy called, and he just slept through it all. It was a year ago. A father called 911 stating his 2-year-old daughter wasn't breathing. I tried to instruct him on how to do CPR while I got the ambulance out there. He kept refusing and telling me he didn't know how, besides me insisting I would help him do it. He told me that his daughter had fallen down the stairs 2 days before the call and that he didn't know what was happening. The mother was screaming in the background. I started to get nervous due to the fact that it was 2 minutes into the call begging this man to do CPR on his baby. He gave the phone to what I'm assuming is the sister of the mother, and I gave her instructions on how to attempt to revive this little baby girl. I told the officer something was going on with this, and I didn't feel right about it, and they get there, and I never knew anything until the news a few weeks later. The father and grandmother were arrested for murder on this little baby. She passed away due to consistent abuse by the father when the mom was gone or at work. I never forgot that call. Wife just shot herself in the head. Husband wasn't sure if she was beyond help, so I have him start CPR. At this point, I'm assuming she's gone, but I want to give him something to do and be able to look back and feel like he did everything he could have. While pumping on her chest, their kid, who is about 10, walks in. He starts trying to have the kid help, so I tell the kid to grab a towel and apply pressure to the wound. I'm telling a child to hold pressure on his mom's self-inflicted gunshot to her head while coaching the father through CPR. The kid was super focused. Dad was about to lose it multiple times. When medics arrived, she was viable. They transported her. I just assumed she didn't make it, but there's always a chance. We rarely get closure. Not 911, but alarm dispatcher. We monitored for an assisted living tower, kind of halfway between independent living and a nursing home, and one night we started getting fire alarms. One apartment unit to start, then two. It quickly multiplied. We sent the fire department on the first alarm per procedure and got no answer at the front desk of the place since it was after hours. After 1 or 2 updates on multiplying alarms, I waited to get disposition to find out if we had a real fire. It certainly looked like it. The alarms seemed to be coming in sequentially from room to room and floor to floor. The thing was, it didn't stick to just fire alarms. We also monitored the dedicated medical alarms in these apartments, and they were lighting up along the same pattern. We report those to FD dispatch too, so I was at the limit of what I could do. When I finally got an update, it felt like my chair was spinning. Yes, there was a fire in this apartment building, and they were trying to put it out. There were even some legitimate medicals, but those were most likely people signaling that they were trapped in their rooms. The other possibility, and it was impossible to tell the difference unless you were a firefighter on scene, was that the medical button or pull cord mechanism had melted and sent a signal as it died. We watched for way too long as the building sent up ghost alarms no one could do anything with but wait out, hoping if there was a finger on the button, they'd be found. My aunt was a 911 dispatcher for a couple of months, and she told me about these 2 calls she had. This little boy around 6 or 7 was bawling on the phone because his big brother had shot himself in the head and his face and brains were everywhere. The other one is that this little girl, I think was 3, had called because her stepdad was beating the shit out of the mom, and my aunt said that you could hear the mom screaming in the background, and so after a while, the dad came in and beat the shit out of the girl for calling the police. And so my aunt had to hear this 3-year-old little girl getting the shit beat out of her while her mom was trying to stop the stepdad. EMT here. When you're in this profession long enough, these people that are experiencing the worst moments of their life just become a job to you. Like, yeah, there's some person dying in the back of my ambulance, but I'm also thinking what I'm going to eat for dinner later or my plans for tonight. I find that kind of chilling. As for something that stuck with me, it's this sick, obese lady who was also a hoarder and had a ton of animals in her house. We picked her up from a hospital and had to transport her to a disabled hole because she can no longer take care of herself, even if she's still all there mentally. When we got to her room, it was no bigger than a cheap motel, and she began crying. It was this kind of cry where she had the realization that she no longer has control of her life and that she'll rot away in this room until she dies. You never really think about the emotions that people go through in situations like that, and my heart broke for her. We get a call at like 7 a.m. from a male who sounded very out of it. He kept saying that his wife was hurt, but we couldn't get much else out of him at first. After some back and forth, we found out that he had got in a fight with her the previous day, like 8 to 10 hours earlier, and hit her repeatedly with one of those meat tenderizer mallets. Then he decided that he couldn't live with it and attempted to cut his own throat. He couldn't follow through with that, so he slit his wrists. He had lost enough blood to go into shock, but not die, and called us when he came to. When responders got on scene, the wife was still alive, though obviously in some seriously rough shape. She was transported, though I'm not sure if she made it or not. CW, mental health, suicide. First party caller, calling from a train station platform, suicidal and threatening to jump. Whilst on the phone, I pull up the timetable for that station and see there's about 20 minutes till the next scheduled train. Responders are about 20 minutes away. This is going to be a tight one. Not even 10 minutes later, he says he can hear a train coming. I can hear the background noise from the guy moving closer to the platform edge. He says he's going to do it. Then I hear the train's engine as it approaches. Clearly it's not due to stop there. Then I hear the horn, some rustling, and the sound of the phone falling before the line drops out instantly. Immediately tell dispatch that it sounded like he'd jumped. Try to call the number back, not expecting to be able to get through. It rings. After 5 or 6 rings, he answers. Tells me that he got scared and couldn't do it. Then he says he climbed down onto the tracks to make sure he doesn't chicken out again. Fortunately, once he tells us he's on the tracks, we can contact a rail signaler. They don't do anything for reports of threatening to jump from a platform or at a level crossing. But if there's a reported trespasser on the line, they'll put the trains on low-speed caution. Police arrive about 5 minutes later and convince him up onto the platform. He was detained for a mental health evaluation, but he lived. My blood ran cold for those 90 seconds where I thought he'd gone through. Not the worst I've had to deal with, but the others don't fit the question as well as this. Not me, and not a call technically. My uncle was a cop for a small town. He worked the overnight and got a call out to a car in the ditch, body ejected. He showed up and, in work mode, bypassed everything except the person, who was unrecognizable, and began CPR. Other officers began to show up. They ran the plates on the car and found out the victim was my other uncle, the cop's brother. My cop uncle had no idea he was giving CPR to his own brother, as he was so unrecognizable from the crash. My uncle did not survive. It is known that he was drinking, though I don't think he was trashed. He was also texting. The thought is that he began to veer off-road, hit a mailbox, and overcorrected and hit the ditch on the other side. He was not wearing his seatbelt. The only reason he was found quickly was because he crashed near a farmhouse, and it was heard by the people living there who called 911. This was in the boonies. Occurred about 2 weeks ago. Get a pretty standard non-urgent difficulty breathing call for meds. Get units started, no problems. Last thing I tell her is to unlock her front door and come back to the phone. She had coded landline. She gets up and just never comes back. I just get an open line. Can hear some shuffling in the background, nothing distressing. Honestly, I just thought she put the phone down and forgot about it. But we're supposed to stay on the line until confirmation of everything, so I didn't hang up. When the fire department gets there, they inform she had died home alone while on the phone with me. She basically dropped dead immediately after unlocking the front door. I was shocked and had to go back and re-listen to the call, knowing that woman was dying for a good 2 to 3 minutes and no one could save her. I'm not a 911 operator, but I work for a company which specializes in critical event management. As such, we have people call us to send out ENS messages when they can't get to a computer. This method of sending out messages was much more popular before we developed a mobile app. Years ago, I worked for a much smaller company than I do now. This meant that I was on call 24/7 as we had some big customers. One night, I just finished work when my work phone started going batshit crazy with calls, texts, and emails. I answered the first call, and it was one of our customers whose building was affected by a bomb which had gone off. They had no network access, but needed to stop people from returning to the office from lunch. I could hear screaming and commotion in the background as I composed their message for them and sent it out. Usually when we get liver operator calls from, they are tests or they're for basic comms, but that one has stuck with me. I'm a police officer and sometimes take emergency calls. One day a woman was calling me, but at first she didn't speak to me. She was addressing another person in the room and told him repeatedly to put the gun away. That was her first sentence, and I instantly was like, oh shit, this is serious. Luckily, the woman was able to speak to me and told me in which area she was and to whom she was speaking to. With this information, my colleague was able to find out the address and send officers there. In the meantime, she told me she had her little baby and her husband with her. Our conversation repeatedly was interrupted with her telling the other person to put the gun away and not shoot her. Every second I was afraid to hear a gunshot and the aftermath. Luckily, the man let the family go outside his house, so after a few minutes, they were in a safe area. Turned out, the family visited an old friend to show their newborn baby. The friend then got confused and couldn't recognize him anymore, maybe because of some form of dementia or something like that. He thought he had intruders in his house, so he went to the bathroom and took his gun. This took place in Germany, so guns rarely are a thing here. After all was cleared, my hands were shaking. Not me, but I was listening to a podcast about 911 calls recently. Basically, they released the calls and interviewed the people that were implicated. First one was a girl stuck in a burning apartment. She's on her balcony and repeats she's going to die. The poor girl is terrified. The operator is trying to reassure her, but she doesn't really listen. That's really hard to hear. She made it out okay. Another one was a driver who just run over a cyclist. He doesn't know if he's dead or not, and he says he can't look. What's impressive there is how much he sounds dead inside, like he has totally removed himself from the situation. And the last one, but the worst, is the Quebec mosque shooter calling 911 to turn himself in. The operator just handles him so well. Not a 911 operator, but I feel like I should share this. One cold night, my wife went missing. Thus was about 8 months ago. I called the police, and while they were searching for her, I got a call. The call was from the guy who took her. What I heard horrified me. I heard muffled screams and an almost demonic-like laugh. He told me where she was located. I instantly drove there. Even if he was lying, I had to check. When I found her, she was naked and had cum all over her with cuts and bruises. She did have birth protection though. I untied her ropes, And then she showed himself. He had a bloody knife in his hands and started running after me while laughing like a maniac. Luckily, I brought a gun and shot him in the head. I still have nightmares about it.